Before we get into the review, my book Breach of Peace is officially available for pre-order. So if that interests you at all and you would like to judge one of my works like I sit here and judge many others, go ahead and check out the links in the description and pre-order yourself a copy today. All right, let's get into the review. The Watch at BBC is probably going to be the most controversial adaptation I've ever had to review here on the channel. There's certainly been ones that have been more universally just like disliked, but this one's just had Discworld fans in a riot for a while because it seems to be such a disloyal adaptation of Terry Pratchett's work, to the point where his own daughter has put out tweets essentially saying, this show, it's not Discworld, let's move on. So for me as a Discworld fan getting into it, this felt kind of dramatic, and I knew from the beginning I would need to essentially have two parts of my brain working to review this show. One part looking at it as a Discworld adaptation, and another just trying to weigh the show on its own merit. Let's get into the former first. How is The Watch as a Discworld adaptation? I think nearly all of the fears Discworld fans had going into this largely hold up to be true, to be actually a problem with this as a Discworld adaptation. There are a lot of reasons people love Discworld, and specifically the City Watch series, which The Watch is heavily based off of. The wit, the social commentary, the extremely fun and engaging deep characters, as well as crazy awesome world building. Each one of these elements has either been reduced or dumbed down to a painful extent. The wit and charm of the characters is largely just replaced with a snarky tone that nearly everyone has. The observations and commentary on our own society are there, and I definitely praise this show for its representation, but it's not as nuanced or profound as I found the books to often be. The comedy, which in Terry Pratchett's actual writing is often compared to Monty Python, instead of feeling like it has that cleverness to it, is just more slapsticky vulgarity, not true to the spirit of the charm of the original series. And finally, the world building, I want to say, is fine enough in the show, and if it wasn't for these other elements being so weak, I would have actually thought it was okay. Not great, but okay for a Discworld adaptation. But with these other disservices, it just makes me kind of upset overall. And I think the primo example of all of these factors coming into one spot is what is done to Vimes in the books versus this adaptation. In the books, Vimes is a gruff officer, and he's definitely jaded and not great at his job when it all starts out. But he gets more engaged, and as you get to know this character better and better, you get to understand why he has this absolutist mentality sometimes against authority. And there's this great paradox between his position in The Watch and the things that come out of his mouth that feel believable yet contradictory. It's so clever. It's why this character is loved by so many. Instead, the Vimes we get in the show is essentially a drunken buffoon, and he's kind of an idiot. There's definitely moments where they're trying to make him more like the Vimes from the books. It doesn't really land because of these things they have not set up and foundationally laid out for the character to then spring off from. What you're left with is a shallow comparison to what the books brought to the table. And I know a lot of people are going to be very mad about that, especially because it's done again and again with several other characters. Another glaring issue is that Death, my personal favorite fantasy character right now, is essentially used as a narrative device. They take it a bit beyond that, but not much, and it feels extremely unearned for having this icon of fantasy in the show. Don't do that. It's Death of Discworld. It's one of like the fantasy characters people point to as like a literary masterpiece, and he's just shoehorned in here for a narrative framing. Stop. No. And narratively, they're clearly pulling from Guards in a lot of the City Watch series, but without the commentary those stories often told and the more rushed nature this show has throughout, it doesn't do justice to nearly any of these storylines. So yes, as a Discworld adaptation, this is not a good show. But completely removing Discworld from this, I was entertained enough. I found this to actually be a rather charming show with some pretty good performances of characters that were not the characters from Discworld. And I know there's going to be people who are angry that I'm praising this at all. Just please note, as a reviewer, I would not be doing my job if I was not completely honest. And by the time like episode 4 or 5 came around, I had just said, okay, this is not Discworld, look at it as another thing. And then the really strong personality this show brings to the table, as well as the ridiculously fast pace, provided enough for me to never be bored. I'm not saying it's good, but I wasn't bored. And the overall positivity and goofiness, as well as the, because it's pulling from Discworld, pretty solid world that was brought before me, as well as some really nice visuals and acting that ranged from fair to great, I ended up having a good enough time. So I acknowledge the fans' anger. I do not think this is a good Discworld adaptation. Yet, for my fantasy fans out there, if you're looking for a fast-paced, punk-influenced, inspired, zany, interesting, good representation throughout fantasy show, this could absolutely be enjoyable for you, especially if you've never read Discworld. I think those people will have the best time with this show by a huge margin. I'm frustrated, obviously. I want a more true Discworld adaptation, but because this show is still pulling from one of the greatest fantasy series ever told, the few things it gets right from that do a lot of work for what else they have going on for them. It's like, you know, if you pull from some of the greatest art ever, even if what you're building on top of it's only fair, you have a very firm foundation to spring forth from. So I think that's why this other thing they're doing ends up working in some ways. And the writing is pretty bad. I'm gonna say the writing in this show is not good, but the actors are clearly really giving it their all, and I want to give them quite a bit of credit there. I mean, even the actor behind Vimes, who is a character I did not like and really struggled getting over with this representation of Vimes from the book, he's doing a lot. He's clearly putting everything he can into the character that was written for him. I do want to say, pretty much to the full squad, I want to give a bit of a tip of the hat to, whether it's Marima Corlett, Joey Eaton Kent, or Adam Hugel, all you guys. You did a lot of work that this show needed to elevate it. And I know there's a lot of people out there who can't separate other elements of the show they didn't like from the acting. I think the acting was pretty good, and I enjoyed a lot of effort that I clearly saw from the cast. So I just want to throw that in there. So I end up sitting at about a 6 out of 10 for this show. It's definitely going to be some people's cup of tea, and I wasn't ever bored or, you know, feeling like I was just rolling my eyes to the point of sheerly exasperated, especially as I got more into the season and I started just completely forming the watch as its own thing. Yeah, it's fine, and I hope in the future we get an actual Discworld adaptation. But that's my genuine reaction to The Watch over at BBC, which you can watch it there or on Amazon, I believe. Let me know what you think of this in the comments down below as Discworld fans, and if you're someone who did really enjoy the show, same. I mean, I enjoyed it enough to give it the praise that I did. I feel like I'm sitting in the middle of like a crowded room. I'm kind of here, and it feels like everyone else is over here. But I hope more people can come to the middle ground and at least appreciate what was done in some sense. Though, again, I completely understand the Discworld fans who are just noping out of this situation. I get it. But anyway, guys, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and let me know what you thought of The Watch in the comments down below. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.